Welcome, everybody, to the Cone of Shame Veterinary Podcast. I am your host, DrAndyRoark. Guys, I am here today with Dr. Simon Haeder. He is a researcher who does a lot of stuff on access to healthcare across industries. We start off talking about his new research was on vaccine hesitancy. And the question really is, are vaccine hesitant parents also vaccine hesitant pet owners? Why wouldn't they be? And the answer is a little bit more complicated and nuanced than you would think. And so anyway, it's a really interesting discussion about why people feel the way they do about vaccines, about where we're going, about what vaccine hesitancy indicates for the future of pet owners and how, we don't necessarily all agree on facts anymore. What does that mean for the future? We end up talking at one point about pediatrics. We talk about how pediatricians had a push for a while to make sure that every clinic would see every child. And now we're having a pushback on the other side where they're saying, if you don't want to vaccinate your kid, that's okay, but I'm not going to see your child. And kind of, where did that push come from? And so anyway, it's, as you can tell, it's sort of a sprawling discussion, but we talk a lot about how people feel about medicine, what is truth in medicine, and where is medicine going. So anyway, really fun conversation. I won't tell you any more about it. Just check it out. It's a really good one. Let's get into this episode.
This is your show. We're glad you're here. We want to help you in your veterinary career. Welcome to the Cone of Shame with Dr. DrAndyRoark.
Welcome to the podcast, Dr. Simon Haeder. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
It is my pleasure. You and I are just meeting for the first time. I saw some research that you put out. It was in the Journal of the AVMA, so JAVMA. The article was called Exploratory Assessment of the Parent Attitudes About Childhood Vaccine Survey Tool to Assess Vaccine Hesitancy and Pet Vaccination Status Among Pet Owners. For those who don't know, you are a self-described scholar of health access. And so you study just a wide variety of different topics. You work across a lot of different industries. I think you've got a really interesting sort of multi-industry perspective in the work that you do. And so you are starting as a faculty member at The Ohio State University in August. You are currently packing up your house. You've got children running around. I really appreciate you making time for this. But basically what I wanted to talk to you about, so I'm reading the research, and I'm looking at what you're doing. And then my simple sort of question to you, because this is something I've wondered for a long time as a veterinarian working in the exam room, talking to pet owners, is a vaccine hesitant parent destined to be a vaccine hesitant pet owner? And I'm just going to stop there and ask you, what's your take on this? Is that true or false?
No, that's a good question. And I have a good answer to it, I think. There's some previous work that I've done that actually looks at measures we currently use to look at vaccine hesitancy among people. And then I developed similar measures or the corresponding measures for pets as well. And there's the the correlation as we call it, is very, very large. So it's not unsurprising to me that if you're concerned about vaccinating your child, you're probably also concerned about vaccinating your dog, because the same kind of things play into those kind of things. Very closely related, maybe not 100%. Probably most people probably closer connected to their children than their pets. Will take a little bit more risk, but very close correspondence.
Do you think that that's kind of the case? Do you think that people who are sort of vaccine hesitant with their children are like, what is your idea of a thought there? Is it like, well, it's just a cat, or like, I'm willing to risk this with my pet who I love, but I'm not willing to risk this with my child. Do you think that is that sort of the calculus that you think people go through?
I think there's a couple of things. I think we have to differentiate. For some people, the dog is as close as a child, and they will probably have the same feelings they have for their child as for their dog, and so the same concerns comes up. The more distant you are from the animal or the pet, I think you probably care less and less, but you also probably care less and less about vaccinating that animal in the first place, because you're distant. And, you mentioned cats. Cat owners actually much less likely than dog owners to vaccinate their cat. That's an interesting nuance here. But I think there's also more stuff about vaccinations in children in the news, in the social media, on the internet, the autism stuff, although it's sweeping over. We have concerns about autism, wrongly concerns about autism and human vaccinations for a couple of decades now. It's starting to show up also in pet field where people are concerned that their pet might develop autism. So it's kind of sweeping over, but I think where we have more internet and more media and all those social media kind of stuff happening is in the human side. So people are obviously more concerned, they're potentially closer, but I think it's sweeping over onto the pet side. And that's my work comes in and where I think the concerns for veterinarians really start to come up.
Tell me, well, first of all, I just want to say, when I say it's just a cat, that's 100% my impression of what's going on in the mind of the pet owner. That's not an Andy Roark attitude. But yeah, at a high level, I say, why don't you go ahead and lay down the finding of this study here, and then I've got some questions for you around it.
Yeah, so broadly, and that's where the long title comes in, there's been very little research on this kind of topic, vaccine hesitant pet owners in the veterinary field. And so what do you have to do? You start with what we have in the human side. And on the human side, we've had this scale called the Childhood Vaccine Survey Tool, to assess vaccine hesitancy, like this long title that we just talked about. It was developed. And so I grabbed that tool that's been, used extensively, translated into many different languages, many different countries. And I try to translate it over into pet and specifically dog and cat owners. And it asks just a handful of questions, 15 overall. Do you trust your veterinarian? How likely are you to vaccinate a new puppy that you get? Are you concerned about vaccine safety for your dog? Those kind of questions. And then generates basically a score that says, are you vaccine hesitant or not? And that measure has been used extensively in pediatrics, especially to guide pediatricians and whether they should talk to the parent or how they should talk to the parent about potentially mitigating those concerns that they have about vaccinations, has been used extensively in research. And so that's the starting point of it all. And then I applied this to dog owners in an exploratory fashion. There's a lot of nuance here, but that probably 1 in 5 or so dog and cat owners definitely fall onto the vaccine hesitant side. That obviously has implications because while vaccine hesitant doesn't mean I'm not vaccinating my pet, it means that these concerns are there and they're closely related to each other. And that's what the paper finds. So that's a broad finding. But there's a lot of nuance here in the scale that I'm using, these 15 items. There's, I think, a guidebook on why people are concerned about vaccinating their pets. And I think it opens the door. And it's not surprising. I'll give you some examples. Just like on the human side, and I think these concept on the human and animal side are closely related. What are the concerns? Well, people are concerned about the safety of the vaccine. They're concerned about the effectiveness. They're concerned about giving too many shots at once. The same stuff that we see on the human side sweeping over onto the animal side.
Talk to me a bit about trust in the veterinarian as it affects the pet owner's decision to vaccinate, because I thought this was a really interesting finding. It was actually it was a source of optimism for me. So yeah, sort of talk to me about what does it mean for the pet owners who have a trusting relationship with their veterinarian?
Yeah, I think that's, again, there's this close mirroring of the human side. If you have a good relationship and a trusting relationship with your primary care provider or your veterinarian, that alleviates a lot of the concerns. I have a follow-up paper that specifically looks at trust and how that affects decisions to vaccinate and all those kind of things. But I think it's safe to say that most people trust their veterinarian. There's some data from my other work that shows the longer you're connected to your veterinarian, the more you trust them, all those things I would expect. But trust is one of those crucial mitigating factors. And most pet owners trust their veterinarian. But if I say most, that doesn't mean everyone, and then the data I'm looking here in this paper found that probably 8%, 9% of those are not so trusting. And then in the middle, another 14% or so that are kind of on the fence of trusting, but then 75, 76% are trusting. And, that's kind of the problem we have with vaccines. I think more broadly that vast majority okay with vaccines, small minority isn't. And that's where all the problems come in because of, the way vaccines work.
So I have this fear a little bit that we're headed for a post-truth society, meaning we're headed to a place where no one agrees on sort of basic facts or scientific research just isn't persuasive and everyone kind of forms up sort of their own belief system. One, as you look at perceptions around vaccine safety or things like that and people making their own decisions about healthcare and things like that, and you look at this research and you look at sort of your findings here, one, do you agree with that? Do you think that we're moving in a place where, people are sort of starting to make more and more decisions that are not going to be backed up by science? Do you think that that's going to continue to be a trend? And if so, what does your research make you think about the future and how veterinary care specifically might look?
That's a good question. From my perspective, and don't have hard data on this, but what I'm seeing, what I'm reading, my own research, it seems kind of like on the ship where we're still heading down this bad path, in my view, where science becomes more contentious, people trust authority less and less, kind of not, doing anything to turn the ship around. And so I think the worst is yet to come where, science remains contentious, people go on the internet and some influencer on Instagram that, doesn't have a degree in anything is telling you that this nutrition is good, this nutrition is bad, this medicine is good, this medicine is bad, or you just need to drink this weird thing and you're going to be cured. We're still heading, I think, in that direction, and it's quite problematic. I also think that's quite problematic on our side, the scientist side, the veterinary side, that we have no cohesive approach to addressing it, right? People are, I think, justifiably concerned about medicine and vaccines and nutrition and all those kind of things. I understand this. I have children. I used to have a pet that just passed away. And you are concerned. You want to know more about safety and need and all those kind of things. And so people go out and search. And some of my other research shows, the more you search on the internet, the more concerned you are, the more hesitant you are, because you're finding all the stuff that's unscientific, but kind of looks scientific. And these people are obviously good at presenting their pseudo research. And so I think the big concern is we're still drifting, and that becomes more prevalent. We see it all around the world. It's not an American phenomenon. We see it in Africa, we see it in Europe, and we see it in the pet world, I think. And we're still drifting. We don't have any solutions to it, and we don't have a cohesive response to it. And so secular trends the trend is not your friend in this, where things are going to get worse, and we see more people concerned about vaccines, vaccination rates going down, and pretty soon that's going to head in a bad direction, I think, for the veterinary field as well.
Do you think, looking at your publication here, and my optimistic heart says, we see a lot of correlation around trust in the veterinarian and vaccine status, meaning when people have a good relationship with their veterinarian, when the veterinarian is someone that they trust, especially if they have a longer term trusting relationship with their veterinarian, they're much more likely to have vaccinated pets. And so even if someone's quote unquote vaccine hesitant, but they trust their veterinarian, they have a good long-term relationship, they may still go on, and you can be hesitant and still go on and get your pet vaccinated. I took that as a source of optimism that perhaps relationship building and working hard to establish trust, just think about on the individual level, me as a veterinarian, if I work hard to build trust with my clients, if I behave in the ways that are going to help me sort of foster those relationships and things like that, it made me optimistic that I might be able to overcome the larger societal trends like what we're talking about. So if this drifting continues and we don't have a cohesive response, at least in my day-to-day life, if I work with pet owners who trust me and I maintain that trust, I should still be effective. Do you think that's true and that's a case for optimism?
I think I agree with you on this one. I know from my own experience, if you're with a veterinarian in the long term, you trust what they say, have positive experiences. I think we got to support veterinarians in this new trends that they're facing and how to respond to them. We need more research to answer the question on what communication techniques are effective and what can we do, what can individual veterinarians do to help people through this. In the meantime, but we don't have any of these kind of things. I think it's on the individual veterinarian to use their authority, emotions, use their science to convince people. But I think there's also a flip side here, right? I think this works if you're, this traditional veterinary model that's kind of dying down a little bit, where we have this vet owns their clinic, it's been there for 20 years. You've been going there with your first cat and your second cat and your third cat, and you trust them. Maybe your kids when they were young were there with you and all those kind of things. If that business model changes, which seems to be, more corporations, more private equity coming in, then you have this vet that you've never met before telling you should vaccinate your pet. And you're like, I'm concerned about it. I read this stuff on the internet. What should I do? And they're on their time scale because they're on the corporate, you got to move. Then, that's a concern you see on the flip side here, I think.
Talk to me a little bit about what you have in mind when you say we need a cohesive approach or a cohesive response. Like, I don't even know what that would look like.
Yeah, it's also a good question. So I think government is maybe not the best source to lead on this. There's not only because the current leadership on the federal level is not very interested in this kind of things, but there's also a giant amount of mistrust towards government and authority in society that's always only been building up over the last decades or so. I think if you ask me personally, I think there's some potential here for veterinarians as a group through their associations and leadership groups to come together and think about creating resources, funding research opportunities to learn what communication works, creating resources and depositories, being on social media as the voice of veterinarians to misspell myths, take concerns seriously, I think is important, but also dispel myths and do those kind of things. And so I think because people tend to have very high trust in veterinarians. I think for veterinarians as a group to come together and their leadership associations and their peak associations, I think that's one opportunity to do those kind of things.
If you were starting as a veterinarian today, say you're gonna hang out your shingle, you're gonna start your own place, what would be the core tenets that you would want to lean into? And again, just at a high level, but just imagine, based on what you know and where you see things going and what sort of communication strategies or what the emotional sort of status of pet owners are, what would be the boxes that you would want to make sure that you checked?
Oh, that's a good one. I never thought about, I think about becoming a vet all the time, but I think that just sailed a little bit for me. But, I think it's important and to think about this in vet school as well. How do we prepare veterinarians for this new world where they're going to encounter people that have concerns about vaccines, but those people also have concerns about all kinds of other treatments and medications, right? It's not just the vaccines, there's other stuff as well. How do we respond to those kind of people? How do we identify these diseases that most vets probably haven't seen a rabid dog, right? But you may soon, because if your rabies vaccinations, we're more into the wildlife. How do we prepare those kind of people? So I would want to be prepared in that. And I would want to create an environment where people know that I'm part of the community. People know that I can be trusted. People understand that I'm part of this community, that I want the best for the community, that I have good science, that I have a good medical background. I want the best for their animal. And I'm going to support them in their decision-making. I'm going to take their concerns seriously, and I'm going to work with them on that. On the flip side, there's also some stuff I'm working on right now is how do veterinarians respond to people that don't want their pets vaccinated? Do they work with them? Do they kick them out of their practice? Those kind of questions are something to deal with here as well.
So what does that research look like for you? What would be your driving questions around that? Are you interested I'm trying to remember if I have met veterinarians who are just like, if you don't want your pet vaccinated, you can't come here. I don't know if I've ever seen those people. Is that kind of what the questions that you're asking is like, what is the appropriate response when someone says, I don't align with whatever your status is or whatever your thoughts are on, say, vaccines, for example?
Yeah. So we had this trend in pediatrics where a few years ago, pediatricians were like, we have to see everyone, even if they don't want to be vaccinated. And the leadership organization was kind of on board with this. You should see them, even if you disagree on all those kind of things. But they've softened that stance. And now it's become more and more common for pediatricians to say, you don't want to get your kid vaccinated, that's fine, but I'm not going to see you. And so how do veterinarians respond to this, where in some ways the dangers might be larger because rabies, dangerous, probably more dangerous than most child dose vaccines for the veterinarians themselves because they can't be vaccinated against rabies. And so the question that I'm kind of starting to answer is like, I'm calling you, I'm saying, hey, I need an appointment. I don't want any vaccinations for my dog. What do you do? Do you see that person? Do you take the opportunity to meet with them, maybe convince them, make sure at least maybe they get other preventive care that they also need because heartworm medications? How do you balance the well-being of the animal, the well-being of public health, your own well-being? How do you answer those kind of questions? And I think no one has kind of asked those kind of questions, and we're leaving individual veterinarians to make these decisions all for themselves because there's like no communal thought on this kind of topic.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting now that you say that, we've had discussions in the past of, are you willing to see these people? Are you going to turn them away? I guess I have always been taught, meet them where they are. Like, this is our chance to sort of talk to them. And I 100% can see that being an old school view. You know what I mean? It was just kind of, when you say this out loud, sometimes you believe things and you don't know why you believe them. And you say, well, I don't have that. And I said, I think when I was indoctrinated into medicine, that was just kind of the mentality that was there, and that was the culture, and I took it in. And anyway, it is interesting. I see how a discussion around changing that sort of perspective could arise.
There are lots of complicated issues with this, right? You mentioned some of them, but it's also like you have unvaccinated dog in your practice, and it brings in you bring in a puppy. Like, how do you balance all the ethical dilemmas around this are challenging, right?
Well, I was assuming when you first said this about pediatricians and you were like, now there's pushback and they're like, well, I won't vaccinate your kid. My first thought was, wow, that seems rather heartless. How could you say, I'm not going to see your child? But the only way I could justify it in my mind would be if you made sort of a public health sort of argument of, I don't want the children coming into my practice to be around children who are not vaccinated, knowing that that's the choice of their parents. And you can make that choice, but I'm not willing to have that known risk for my other patients. That's the only way it sort of made sense to me. Yeah. Do you think that that's sort of an accurate assessment of what's driving that decision?
I think that's probably true. And the question is like, how do you handle it? Do you have separate waiting rooms for people? Like, how do you...
Like a dog and cat waiting room. But
it's challenging, right? It's, not a veterinarian, obviously, by training. It's like, I don't know how infectious many of the diseases are, but, the concern is clearly there that if you have a bunch of dogs, I've seen plenty of waiting rooms with a bunch of dogs, right? And you're like, what if they're not vaccinated against Bordetella? Like all these things that come to your mind. Yeah. And how do you handle it? And what do you do? And pediatricians more and more, encounter more of these cases, and then they have to make decisions, for themselves, for their practice. It takes more time to talk to vaccine hesitant parents. That's not reimbursable and all those kind of things. But then also, I think the broader implications for the other kids in terms of pediatricians in the waiting room really matters. But then again, if you send them away to a pediatrician that's willing to see them, obviously they're going to start clustering, right, in that area. And so you get more concerns about outbreaks and implications for that. So ethical dilemmas all over the place, I'd say.
Dr. Simon Haeder, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate you taking time to be with us. Where can people keep up with your research? I said you're working on a lot of different things. You're heading to your new home at The Ohio State University. I think you have some research that you sort of mentioned a little bit here, and we talked about earlier, around accessibility of care, which I think is going to be really, really interesting when it comes out. Where can people keep up with you?
I'm easily findable. You can search me on the web and something will pop up. I'm on all the social media. I'm on LinkedIn, I'm on X, and I'm on a Blue Sky as well. So you can reach me. You can find me on my faculty website as well.
Outstanding. Thank you so much for being here. Guys, thanks for tuning in, everybody. Take care of yourselves, gang. I'll talk to you later. And that's what I got. Guys, I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you got something out of it. Thanks again to Dr. Haeder for being here. Guys, be well. I'll talk to you later on. Bye-bye.